And we are back live in another Cloudburst. I'm here with my dad, David, and my name is Judah. And we're going to talk about. Oh, bring this up a little bit. Sorry. But we're
testing.
One,
Can you
two,
hear?
Three. We're going to talk about. We were just talking about business, the difficulties of business, and I guess I don't know we probably have to define business, but in friendship and emotion and speaking and just navigating, I think a lot of it has to do with communication, right?
Yeah, communication with different kinds of people. It's not communication with your spouse or with your children. It's communication with employees or friends. I mean, the difference, between employees and friends.
Yeah. Well, it came up because you went to was it
Toastmasters meeting?
Which
Yeah,
is pretty awesome. And then simultaneously, similarly, I had thoughts recently about how emotions affect the way I talk. And as I remember talking to one of my employees about one of our Paul and I's employees about something difficult, and how I couldn't, like is happening now. My eloquence was lost.
Well, this morning they asked me, for some reason, they have this activity in Toastmasters, which is good. They're trying to improve speech and communication, and they ask you to immediately. I said, see, they don't like us. That's good. Excuse me, I'm going to learn to drop those. They asked me, among others, to respond immediately in 1 to 2 minutes on certain questions, just out of the blue. We just happened to be there as visitors.
Yeah.
And the lady asked me, David, what 2 people influenced you in your life? I thought, I'm not going to talk about Jesus. That's too obvious. I'm going to talk about my dad and my wife.
Yeah.
So I talked about my dad, who's been dead like 25 years. And then I said, he was so kind. His kindness and his industry were examples to me. But as I started talking, I began to remember him.
Yeah.
And I get emotional. I always get emotional at certain times. And it's very difficult for me. I'm getting better because when I'm at church, I'm sharing things and if I let myself, I'll get too emotional. But talking about my wife and talking about how she taught me things. She taught me about loving children, even when Judah was in her, when she was pregnant. She loved him. She talked about that. I never thought about that. I never thought. She told me, because I'm thinking about that, and I'm getting emotional, and I'm telling Judah, and Judah's getting emotional. So we begin to think about that, getting emotional when you're talking to people. And I think if you're a Toastmaster or a speaker, you want to show a little feeling, but too much emotion makes you look weak, right?
Well,
and it embarrasses the people that are listening.
Yes. And I guess what it brought to my mind was the difficulties I've had separating emotion in business. As we have tenants and things that they have, please don't evict me. And we talked about occasions where they're grifters, but it's hard to tell the difference. You can't read people's minds.
Yeah, we're talking about how people can play on your emotions and how you might, from time to time, see through them and see, especially when you look back, you think that guy was just lying to me. And we talked about a couple of examples where people were just liars. Judah's brother Paul had trailer parks, still does, and back early on when he had his one big trailer park, there were just people that seemed to be your nicest friend, and they turned out to be thieves, and would tell you to your face, I can't believe anybody did this. Who did this? And they did it, you know. But seeing through that, and sometimes they would come and visit me and talk and play on my emotions to get money for drugs and things like that. So being able to read people and to be, what kind of attitude do you have to people like that?
Well, and what is the approach?
Here we're talking about emotion. Suddenly we're reading people's character. I'm not sure exactly where are we going here.
Well, because the thing that came to my mind was that I think that emotions and intellect, our emotions and our intellect are at war.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hard. Our emotions attack our ability to process and think through things correctly. And so my immediate thought as I was talking to you is, well, what would Jesus be like as a businessman? And you brought up the fact that he knew that Judas was lying to him and eventually betrayed him. And he knew but it comes back to this thing that we've talked about, is whether or not Jesus, how much he knew. You know, God obviously can see and know our thoughts, but could Jesus, was he telepathic? And I don't think he was.
At all times and at all places. Obviously, he knew things that he saw things. He said, I saw you under the fig tree. And he said, the one I remember is, he says, you go down to that village over there and you'll find a donkey tied up there. You untie it and bring it to me. If they ask you, why are you doing that? Tell them the master needs it. Well, how did he know that? Well, there's some knowledge, obviously, that God gave, especially to Jesus, at different times, obviously. But I don't think at all times, because, for example, Jesus he went to the fig tree. This is on his way to Jerusalem before he died. He goes on by the fig tree, and it says he went to look at the fig tree if by chance, happily, there might be some figs on it. He didn't know whether there were figs or not. And since there were no figs, and then it says there weren't any figs because it wasn't the time for figs.
And then he cursed the tree.
Well, why? Because one apparent interpretation is that the tree didn't recognize who Jesus was. If the tree had been there in the will of God and been in the will of God, the tree would have borne figs even out of season for the master of the universe, for the king. See, what else could it be? Why would he curse the tree? The tree was just, so the tree should have been in the will of God and moving according, but the tree wasn't. That's all I can see. Otherwise, this is something that most people would just sort of write out of the scripture and say some ill-informed person put that in there. That's not like Jesus. Just like it wasn't like Jesus to tell the poor lady up in Tyre or Sidon, hey, I can't help you. I'm here for the children of Israel, and it's not right for the dogs, for me to feed the food for the children to the dogs, speaking to her as a dog, And she takes it and says, well, even the puppies, the little dogs, they eat the crumb. Well, I mean, he basically calls her a dog. Well, you can just write that out and say, that's not like Jesus. It's not the Jesus I know. Anyway, we're talking about Jesus, how his feeling toward people.
And you brought up the fact that he did, in some ways, run a business in the sense that he had the 12 disciples. Yeah. He was, to a certain extent, responsible for them and responsible for their, he had to provide, we know a couple times they said, what do we do about food?
Yeah, that's right.
And he had a process to deal with, but his process was just to trust in God.
Yeah, well, he did give them orders. He said, do this.
Yeah.
And he sent them out 2 by 2, told them, do this, and he was always working on them. But saying, for example, if you want to be higher, you're going to have to serve each other. If you want to be up to number one, you're going to have to act like number 12. And he was training them, but he was responsible for what things they did, and he was responsible for the fact that one of them. He says, "Haven't I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil?" And that's a hard scripture. He chose to fulfill the scripture that one of them was going to betray him. He says, if it had been an enemy, I could have understood that, he says, in the Psalms. In the Psalms, talking to Jesus, says, but it was a man of my own, a friend with whom I went to church together. We walked in friendship. So the question is, how did Jesus see the interior of his disciples and know their character and treat them? And so did he treat them like businessmen? How does a businessman do? What if he was the best businessman that we could ever work for? What would he be like?
Right. Boss. What would he be like as a boss? But how did he navigate that space we're talking about in a human, when emotions, because he was an emotional guy. Jesus was an emotional guy.
Okay.
And how did he, what can we learn from the hard decisions? I think about when they asked him to come heal his good friend Lazarus, and he decided not to for a while.
That's right.
And
he got pressure to go. What are you doing? Sitting here.
I'm sure there was emotions.
Yeah.
What is the word? Where they're sort of infringing on our logic and our intellect,
Yeah, I think there were heavy emotions. He wanted to be a good friend to Lazarus, but he knew in his heart there was something that God wanted him to do, to let Lazarus die. There was something, a word from God he got, and no one could dissuade him from that. But there were emotions there. There's where he had to struggle with early, and not early on, but before his death, he had to struggle with the will of God versus his own emotions. I'm sure he wanted to go, but he said, no, let's just wait here.
Well, and that brings up the question for me. I think there's got to be a third, I don't even know what you'd call it, element, in which we have intellect, we have emotion, but there's the spiritual aspect where we have, and faith is part of this.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Where we've decided what we need to do. We've figured out what we need to do, whether it be through a blend of emotion and intellect. But there is we talk about the what's his name? Stephen Covey talks about the burning yes. It's easier to say no if you have a burning yes, and so having a orientation, a direction, and an ultimate goal is beneficial to being able to make decisions regardless of your intellect or emotions.
I was thinking about the time that Peter, where Jesus clearly told his disciples, one of many times, not many times, but a few times, that Jesus told his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be persecuted, beat up, and die, and killed, and I will be raised the third day. And Peter says, oh, God forbid. We're not going to let that happen to you.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus' emotions were if he were like us, he said, well, what do you think I should do?
Yeah.
I can remember being in Vietnam, and I said, okay, guys, we're going to go. I had a platoon, and I said, we're going to go out here. We're going to go way over here and set up this ambush. And my platoon sergeant, who had been there for several more months, he said, oh, no, we can't go there. And I said, well, what do you think we ought to do? I mean, but that's how I was. But Jesus said he looks at his disciples, but he looks past Peter. He wants the disciples to see that he's addressing Peter. He says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." I mean, but he gets wrought up. He has to overcome the other emotion, which is to go ahead and to accept what Peter says and to avoid this thing. Peter's saying, "Far be it, oh God forbid, Lord, we're going to keep you from it. You're not going to go up there and do that, you know." And he's saying, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Satan was using Peter to do this, and he had to upbraid Peter, you know. So his emotions, the burning yes was, "I've got to go up here." So he was able to put this down, because so we can think that Jesus always had a clear vision of where he was going. So not like us.
Yeah.
And I said, like us.
Well, no,
We don't always have a clear vision.
I rarely have a clear vision. I think that's
he's really good.
That's one of the main problems I'm taking inventory of my life as I get older, and I'm trying to be a better man, you know. And part of this is through Ramble Source and talking to other people and talking to you about these things. What's coming clear to me is that my allergy to planning, or I could even say my desire to be organic and free flowing and live by the Spirit is antithetical to helping people, is antithetical to being part of the kingdom, because I think we talked about it before. It takes away intentionality. If you don't have goals that bring us and self-determination to bring us to those goals, then, like I said before, we're sort of blown around by whatever
people need of you, want of you.
Yeah, and every little thing that comes up, whether it's true or not, say someone's need or heavy emotion or demand, has to be refigured in there. I think of used to be, we had these what are they called, the navigation things,
compasses.
No, Jarman or something. I forget what it's called, but in the cars, where they would say, it would talk to you, and you take a left at
GPS,
and phones do it now. But if you took your own way, it would say recalculating. Right. That's how I feel sometimes as I'm kind of going along. I kind of have a plan, and I have to recalculate.
That's a good question. If indeed, and there was a part of my life, I said, this is the way I'm going to live when I was young, about 26. I'm just going to respond to what people need, you know. So I'm going along, people need this, I'm going to need it. I didn't have that intentionality, you know. And so it's possible that we get off the track. That is, I don't want to say, but the evil spirits can get into that, and they can drag you off the path, you know. And so we need to have Jesus set his face like flint. Now, we were talking about emotions, and emotions, sometimes you just have to overcome them. There are emotions that do help us along the way. Jesus says, I have desired with a fervent desire to eat this Last Supper with you. You know, and he was happy to be there, you know. I was thinking today, why did I get emotional when I was talking? Because I wasn't talking to anybody. I really didn't. I think sometimes when I talk, I just talk to myself or talk for myself. I'm not. If I was talking to anybody, I'd be concerned with how they were feeling and how they were taking what I was saying, you know. And I'd be more direct, like I am now. You know, I know that people are watching us, so I don't get emotional very easily. But if I just stand up to talk about my dad or my wife, and I begin to talk to myself, you know.
And I have thought about it sometimes about myself when I get emotional. How much of it is self-indulgence for me? I don't want to speak for him, but for me, I feel in retrospect, sometimes when I get tearful, I have to be careful that I'm not indulging in self-pity or even pity for somebody else, indulging in that sense of pathos or for myself or others.
Yeah, what is that? Okay, we're indulging. Why? What is it that is good for us and not good for other people? Or we feel I want to do this, but it's really not productive. What is that? I'm a good person because I never did say. Maybe I feel like when I'm talking about my dad. I mean, I was just thinking about this morning when I got emotional. I'm thinking about my dad. Maybe I'm thinking I never did really show respect for my dad as I should have. And I'm talking about my wife. She's sitting right there beside me. I've never let her know how important that was to me, and it's a way to kind of pay myself, reward myself now. Now I'm showing because I'm really a good guy. See, because look at me, I'm getting emotional. Maybe that's self-indulgent.
It's complicated though, right? It's
always complicated. And when it comes up, emotion, we were talking about business.
Yeah.
Business is easier to overcome emotions because you get the intentionality, right? This is business. In other words,
stay on the road.
I'm in this to achieve this. You are not achieving. You're not fulfilling your role. I'm going to have to fire you. It's not because I don't like you. I have a hard time putting up with the way you are, the way you talk, or, the way you eat, your bad habits, whatever. No, it's you're not fulfilling the goal, right? That's business. Yeah. Friendship, that's something else. If I have to fire someone that's a friend, you're talking friendship. You say, then you can get emotional. This is friendship because you feel for that other person. You feel. It's a matter of feeling. It's not a matter of the goal. The goal is to keep this going. Your friendship, friendship, emotion.
Yeah, but even in family, confrontation. Confrontation. That's another place in which communication can be completely derailed by our emotions when we need to communicate something, and it's helpful for everybody. It's healthy to communicate hard truths.
Yeah, but now you're talking about sometimes you're talking about confusion. Maybe you get emotional like that. There's so much going on here. I can't, I'm so angry about it, but I'm so sorry that you guys, if you're talking to family, sometimes emotions can be just like confusion, not just sympathy. Like when I was thinking about my dad, is like sympathy, kind of sympathy, something like that. Then you have confusion. Then you have anger, right? That's another emotion. So we were talking about politicians, how you couldn't. Judah was saying he couldn't be a politician because he's too emotional. And I was saying there's this guy, John Boehner, who was I think he was the minority leader, a majority leader in Congress, right? And he used to cry. They used to make fun of him, though, for crying, see? But he got up to a high level. Yeah. But that kind of thing, sympathetic emotion, they don't like that. People don't like that. But they get used to anger. I mean, Biden and Trump, they get angry. And people get used to that. They kind of like that. It'd be nice not to have a politician that was angry unless he was angry at evil, really evil, not the other guy.
Well, I think a great example of that was Reagan. He would get angry and not let the emotion take over. He would say sharp. He'd have sharp words.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
But couched in sometimes a little humor.
Yeah,
and a little cleverness. You know, to take the edge off.
Yeah, that's right.
Not,
That's right.
So.
That's right. Well, now that we've completely confused the issue of emotion, maybe we should take it up later.
Yeah, I think it's a good subject.
In our family, it's an issue, not so much, of course, for business so much, except out of it. Judah is in business with Paul, his brother, so there's emotion that comes involved there in dealing with people, dealing with each other. But I mean, as far as in a business relationship,
Mhm.
there's always emotion in a family. Oh,
Yeah.
there's always emotion. Oh, yes. And I would say to a family, if you don't have emotional communication in your family, you better check yourself and see whether you have any love in your
Yeah,
family. If you care about each other.
I agree.
I mean,
Yeah.
emotion helps me to know that other people are there. Are you really there? And especially if it wells up and you don't, it's unexpected. Oh, well, that's good to know. Something like that.
Yeah.
But if you're sad that you had to tune into this session of this Cloudburst, let us know. Or
Yeah.
if you're very happy, or if you're angry.
Well, let's see. We have Color Gamer who said, "I am liking!" exclamation mark. So
Good.
thank you, Color Gamers, for tuning in. And we've had a couple people say they tuned in and enjoyed listening. I think.
But we're just exploring, and we'll continue to. I think this one will sharpen our question and come back on it in the future. So,
All right, that sounds good. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you next week.